Marjorie Taylor Greene was destroyed by Jasmine Crockett on live television. Yes, you didn't mishear that. And if you still have doubts, please listen to the story I'm about to tell. Marjorie loses it as Crockett confronts her live on air. That wasn't just a clickbait headline. That was the moment America held its breath and then exploded. April 2025. 94 days had passed since Donald J. Trump set foot back in the Oval Office for his second term as president. A term not built on the slogan "Make America Great Again," but on systematic revenge and backroom power deals. The atmosphere in Washington at that time didn't resemble a city running a democracy. It felt like a train station at war, where everyone knew something was approaching, but no one knew whether it would crash into a wall, hit them, or spiral out of control. Then came the name Marjorie Taylor Greene all over the headlines. Not because of a strange statement, not because of a bizarre live stream, but this time because of a handshake caught in the light between power, stocks, and privileged information. The press exposed Marjorie, in her role as chair of the DOGE subcommittee, which oversees both public and private data technologies, had quietly purchased a large amount of Tesla stock just after a private meeting with a representative of Elon Musk. The meeting had no minutes recorded. The trade was executed 72 hours later, and only 2 weeks after that, the Trump administration announced a new policy offering generous incentives to Made in America corporations, with Tesla as the first to benefit. The media uproar broke out like an unexpected summer fever. From the New York Times to Fox News, from independent voters to moderate conservatives, every question pointed to one single thing: public ethics. And at the center of that storm was Marjorie, once seen as the tireless megaphone of the Republican Party, now suddenly the most vivid reflection of corruption. Congress erupted. Democrats demanded an investigation. Republicans split. Trump said nothing, but Elon Musk retweeted an article defending Marjorie 3 times. Then came the shocking news. Marjorie would appear live on MSNBC, face-to-face with her longtime rival, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. No one believed it was real. MSNBC, the network Marjorie had called the traitorous stronghold of the left-wing media. Crockett, the one who had once described Marjorie as the perfect combination of ignorance and power. But this time, no one backed down because both knew this wasn't a debate. This was a test of survival. One side needed to cleanse its name to stay alive. The other needed to keep the flame of truth burning. During a presidency many had begun to call the post-constitutional United States. That night, the MSNBC studio was set up like a sterile room for national psychological surgery. The lights were dimmed, leaving only 3 focal points: a long, unnamed table, 2 chairs facing each other, and a microphone waiting to be switched on. No banner, no slogan, no branded language, just one special broadcast called The Ledger, with the most neutral host in the business. Ollie, entrusted with the most difficult task of the year, to remain silent while the truth was dragged into the light with flesh and blood. Ollie looked into the camera. His gaze made no attempt to soften anything. His voice was steady and irresistibly compelling. Welcome to this special edition of The Ledger. Tonight, we're joined by 2 members of Congress who now stand at the center of one of the most pressing questions in American public life, where the line is drawn between public power and private interest. His eyes shifted to the right. To my right is Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, chair of the DOGE subcommittee. To my left is Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas, member of the House Judiciary Committee. He didn't wait long. He turned fully toward Marjorie. Congresswoman Greene, you personally requested to appear live on tonight's broadcast. This is your opportunity to speak directly to the public. Please go ahead. Marjorie lifted her chin. Her voice rang out steady, as if it had been rehearsed a dozen times. First of all, I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity, because for the past 3 weeks, I've been the target of a coordinated smear campaign, not just against me personally, but against anyone who dares to stand up to the collusion between the deep state and the left-wing media. She didn't glance at Crockett. Her eyes stayed fixed on the camera. I am a duly elected representative doing my job, protecting the people of Georgia and the people of this country from global corporations, backroom deals, and power plays that have been pushing America into crisis for decades. They say I bought stock. Yes, I invest like hundreds of other members of Congress, but I'm the only one being hunted. Why? Because I fight back. Because I'm the only one asking the hard questions about Doge, about Elon Musk, about national data, and how they're turning this country into a fully privatized corporation. What you're watching isn't about ethics. It's a political execution. Her voice dropped, tightening. I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness. I came here to say I'm not backing down. And if anyone thinks they can scare me with hashtags, with Twitter headlines, or with a primetime show, they've picked the wrong woman. Ollie tilted slightly, not to manage the flow of the stage, but like a man who just swallowed an ice cube through his ear. It wasn't Green's confidence that unsettled him. It was the smoothness. Everything she had just said, from political witch hunt to investments like everybody else, hit every note his ears had learned to anticipate. And because it all landed exactly where it was supposed to, it carried no edge. It felt like a flag sewn from old slogans, still shaped like something true, but fading, moldy at the seams. Ollie had seen enough of these nights to know. Any trace of personal reaction, any flicker of judgment, and this would no longer be a broadcast. It would become an execution. So he simply turned his gaze left and gave her the floor. Congresswoman Crockett. Jasmine didn't adjust her mic. She didn't shift her chair. She didn't inhale. She remained exactly as she was. Yet somehow, the light felt as if it had tilted toward her. If America wants to understand why public trust in this Congress has evaporated into the air, then what just happened is your answer. We didn't just listen to a speech. It was an exercise in distance, a calculated move to widen the gap between a public official under scrutiny and a system too fearful to speak plainly. I'm not surprised. I'm just tired. Tired of sitting here, listening to someone in public office speak of being hunted, while she remains the only person in this room privately invited to meet with Elon Musk, and 3 days later, held shares in Tesla. I don't need a narrative. I don't need framing. I need to name what is painfully specific. Tonight, Congresswoman Green isn't here to explain. She's here to dilute. Why did you support Doge, Elon Musk, and the cuts to Social Security? The question didn't land with volume. It landed with precision, sharp, ringing like a hammer striking the underside of a steel rail. Marjorie remained silent. She kept her face in its rehearsed shape, composed of practiced restraint and a stillness trained to survive the camera's hunger. Behind her forehead, thought began to move, not in panic, but in activation. I'm speaking to you. You heard the question, didn't you? Crockett's voice followed up, not louder, but edged like a thread being pulled taut. Each second that passed without a response turned the silence into a public reckoning. Inside Marjorie, a switch flipped, not to defense, but to memory. Washington, 3 months ago. West Wing, a late afternoon in winter. The air colored in steel and calculation. Trump didn't look up when she entered. He traced something with chalk across a black planning board. A diagram, maybe, or a sequence of stock initials arranged like field artillery. He motioned toward the door with a flick of 2 fingers. A gesture that ended all room for questions. On the table, a red tag folder. She didn't reach for it. She knew her part had already been written. They're going to shred it apart. We need someone who can stand in the fire without flinching. No need to defend. Just signal. Green can hold the line. M's voice came from the speaker, flat, metered, utterly bloodless. A broadcast, not a conversation. The kind of frequency you learn to decode in long corridors, far from microphones. She can put Doge in the mouth of the media without tanking its spine. She knows how to inject movement without compromising control. Nobody asked for her approval. Nobody waited for a nod. She was there. That was enough. The donation had already moved Musk's team to the Georgia PAC. The campaign had already prepped. Her face layered into America First Digital. The machine was live. Her role didn't require belief. It demanded presence. Not the protector of policy, but the remapper of moral terrain, redrawn with waterproof ink that couldn't be scrubbed by hearings or headlines. Back in the studio, the light hadn't shifted. Crockett still held her gaze. The camera waited. The country waited. But Marjorie understood what they really wanted. Not truth, not reasoning, but the upper hand in linguistic warfare. She didn't answer. She attacked. Her voice emerged clean, low, unhurried. Each word pulled from the chamber like a bullet laid on marble. Cute question. I see the effort. Rewriting the narrative from across the table where morality is 3D printed and purity is prepackaged into tweets that play well for the weekend shows. I represent Georgia. I represent those who know growth doesn't grow from pity. It demands shovels and risk. Doge is part of the infrastructure. Musk holds the map. I walk with them because I choose to put this country on tracks that go forward, not display shelves built for old policy trophies. Social Security isn't a vine, it's a beam. I didn't dismantle it. I reformed it so that those who climb aren't pulled down by the weight of ornamental rescue. And for anyone disturbed that I don't apologize for keeping pace with the world, we should ask ourselves, are we living in the present or clutching the costume of a politics we once mistook for clean? She didn't turn toward Crockett. She released her words forward like a lead sphere sliding across hardwood. Heavy, steady, carrying just enough force to fracture the first tiles of any moral courtroom hastily assembled in that broadcast studio. No one moved, no one interjected. Only the sound of breath hummed softly through the mics, and the ceiling lights cast their sterile clarity like a midday hearing before a nation that had stopped flipping channels. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, not to debate, but to prosecute. Her voice didn't rise, it sharpened. I sat through your defense of moving with the times. I heard you say you were putting the country on the tracks, but Congresswoman Green, you're not building tracks. You're selling tickets to a runaway train with Elon Musk at the controls, while millions of Americans sit in the last car, without seats, without shelter, and without a meal at the end of the month. You've decided that holding elected office grants you the license to blur consequence. You believe being elected means you can say anything, dodge everything, and use your title as insulation from accountability. You chair the Doge subcommittee. You hold subpoena power. You could have questioned. You could have paused funding. But instead, you went before the press and called Doge a new frontier of financial freedom. That quote now hangs as a framed poster in the SpaceX lobby. On February 4th, Tesla announced a 37% surge in growth. 3 days earlier, your office held a closed-door meeting with the Digital Infrastructure Committee. No invitations, no live stream, no transcript. But your stock portfolio went up, and Musk told the press, we've entered an era of strategic cooperation. Cooperation between who? Legislative power and unregulated capital. You called Doge the future. I ask, whose future has room left for the working poor? Since January, 17 libraries across rural Georgia have closed due to budget cuts. 6 community health clinics reduced their intake hours. 3 school meal programs were suspended. During the same period, Doge received 2 new research grants worth $860 million, approved in part by the subcommittee you chair. You said you walk with Musk. So, who walks with the laid-off workers in Brunswick after their plant was automated out of existence? Who stands beside the disabled Americans denied Medicaid renewal after the state enacted top-down cost-cutting orders, while the tech sector received green lights and open wallets? This isn't about owning stock. This is about manipulating your oversight role to engineer policy that benefits your personal portfolio. I'm not asking you to apologize. I'm asking you to respond. Who told you not to demand a hearing on Doge in the last 3 months? Who asked you to stay silent on SpaceX's use of blockchain-derived citizen data? Who notified you before Tesla was added to the critical infrastructure preference list? And how much of that sits in your investment account? You say these questions are personal attacks. I say they're performance reviews. No one elected Elon Musk. But the people of Georgia elected you. They didn't elect a shield. They elected a watchdog. And when a watchdog sits by while the gate is open from the inside, that's not representation. That's complicity. Marjorie heard her name pinned to accusation. Live, national, direct, not implied, not debated, charged. Her body, tense before her mind, caught up. Heat surged up her neck. Her hand clenched the edge of the chair like it could crack the accusation wide open. She'd won many verbal wars by flooding the field, outshining, outangling, outlasting. But this time, the air refused to move. Her voice broke loose, raw, uneven, forced through clenched fury. I've served the people of Georgia with complete loyalty. I haven't sold my soul to any corporation. No one hands me maps. I write my own path. You're the one staging this theater, using this network to throw mud at someone who won't kneel. I'm an American woman who loves this country. I'm not a pawn in the little chess game your side's trying to play. You're from Texas, but you act like you're auditioning for Hollywood. Don't talk to me about ethics when your party supports open borders, dismantles families, and crushes American businesses. Ally leaned forward, raised a hand with a steady voice, trying to brace the signal. Congresswoman Green, please, let's keep this space civil. She didn't stop. You think a calm voice makes you right. You think using your law degree gives you the authority to sentence people in front of cameras, but I won't let you use me as your next headline. Crockett moved her finger toward the mic. A quiet tap. No flair, only focus. Congress doesn't need symbols. Congress needs literacy. The public doesn't need performance patriotism. They need someone who can define power without choking on it. You call me Hollywood. I call you the lead actress in a show without a script, just volume. I don't need to shout to prove I'm right. I bring documentation. You say you serve Georgia, but the people of Georgia stood outside a closed clinic last week, turned away from prescriptions because Medicaid froze under your preferred policies. You say you didn't sell your soul. I look at your stock disclosures and see a soul indexed under a ticker symbol. You say you draw your own map, but you sat in the West Wing, listened to Musk through a speakerphone, and walked out holding the route pre-drawn in someone else's handwriting. Ally didn't speak. The set froze, not in chaos, but in clarity, because truth had taken up every square inch of space. You call this a setup. I call this oversight. Not over you, over everything you're shielding behind that badge of public service. Ally lightly turned over a sheet of paper, not to read, but to reset the air pressure in the room. The studio still held the weight of everything said before. Crockett leaned back, eyes steady, carrying the aftershock of words that had landed like lead. Green inhaled sharply, her hands still resting on the desk, as if bracing for a new front in a battle that refused to end. Ally didn't look at either guest. He faced the center camera. His voice stayed even, but the undertone carried the kind of gravity reserved for matters of national spine. Let's pivot to something different, though no less tied to questions of power, accountability, and the Constitution. In recent weeks, a case has shaken legal circles and civil rights communities nationwide. Kilmar Abrego Garcia, an undocumented immigrant accused of ties to the MS-13 gang, was deported under a classified executive order without trial, without judicial oversight. The Fourth Circuit Federal Court issued a blistering rebuke, calling the move a dangerous collapse of the rule of law and, in unprecedented language, comparing it to policies enforced under the Pinot regime. Chris Hayes called it the most severe constitutional rupture in recent memory. Ashra Gappa, a former FBI agent and current associate director at Yale Law School, described it as a total failure of due process. Ally turned slightly to his right toward Green. Congresswoman Green, your office publicly supported this administration's decision to proceed with expedited removal in the Garcia case. You believe the Constitution grants the executive branch the authority to remove individuals without judicial process based solely on classified intelligence? And if so, where in your view is the boundary between law enforcement and the erosion of law itself? Jesus Christ. Freaking MSNBC. You people just can't let the Killamar thing go, can you? The media has been beating that corpse for days. Not tired yet? Marjorie didn't speak into the mic directly, but it didn't matter. She tilted her head, muttered toward the studio floor crew, but the red on-air light burned above her like a sun that wouldn't blink. Her words weren't scripted. They were real, and the country heard every syllable. Her face lost color, not from fear, but from the shock of having her mask pulled off in real time. But she didn't shrink. She sat upright, hands pressed firm on the table, eyes locked forward, holding the line, Not for optics, but for something older and deeper, loyalty without reverse gear. I'm not going to apologize for standing with an administration trying to protect this country's borders. I won't bow to journalists who think everything's chilly in the 70s. Kilmar Abrego Garcia is a gang member. We have files. We have links. We have a duty to protect Americans from gang violence. I don't need a court to tell me who's a threat. I need a president who's willing to act before someone else ends up dead. You want to talk process? You want to quote the Constitution? That's fine. But law doesn't wipe blood off the sidewalk. Procedure doesn't bring back the fathers already buried. Her voice began to shake, not from sorrow, but from the effort of holding herself still under heat. She wanted to stand. She stayed seated, but every word now carried the posture of someone on the edge of exploding. I don't care what you think about Pina. I care about the cost of hesitation. The studio fell silent, not out of respect, but out of tension so thick it could snap. No one interrupted. No one cleared their throat. Not Crockett, not Ally, not even the floor director. Marjorie sat motionless, breathing hard through her nose, eyes sharper now. Less to win, more to endure. Maybe I'm a pawn, but if I'm the last pawn standing between this administration and a wall of moral grandstanding dressed up as microphones, then I'm the kind of pawn worth playing. Jasmine touched the table just once, a still gesture, a courtroom pause. Then the flood began. Her voice didn't rise. It descended like water over stone, steady, cold, and impossible to block. I've spent over a decade in immigration defense. I've sat across from detainees held in ICE centers without access to phones. I've seen kids 11 years old fingerprinting removal papers because they couldn't yet read. But not once did I expect to hear this level of legal ignorance from a sitting member of Congress. She turned to Green, calm, clinical, not with anger, but the gaze of someone diagnosing the disease before announcing the prognosis. Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution does not grant the president the authority to designate guilt. Article 1, Section 9 forbids bills of attainder, laws, or actions that declare individuals guilty without trial. The 1996 Expedited Removal Act passed by Congress, not dictated by the White House, clearly states in Section 235B1A22 of the INA, any individual not posing a verified national security threat retains the right to a judicial hearing. And in Zadvydas Village, Davis 533 U.S. 678, 2001, the Supreme Court explicitly ruled that the government cannot detain or deport without a judicial check. Even indefinite detention was deemed unconstitutional. In Hamby v. Rumsfeld, 2004, the court held that even a U.S. citizen labeled an enemy combatant could not be denied due process. But here you are suggesting a man never charged, never tried, be disappeared based on nothing more than executive suspicion. She clasped her hands like offering the public a file they didn't know they needed. You say you stand for protection. I ask, who protects the Constitution when those enforcing the law are erasing the process? You say you don't need a court to know who's dangerous? I ask, who gets to decide? Elon Musk, Fox News, a back-channel phone call from the West Wing. You bring up blood on sidewalks. I bring up ink on clauses. Blood isn't a pass to burn due process. Otherwise, we'd still be in Salem. 1692. The studio grew still, not in politeness, but in reverence. Even the lights seem quieter. You are a member of Congress. You wield legislative authority. You can draft bills, hold hearings, introduce oversight. But when you say the president can skip the courts and eject human beings based on suspicion, you're no longer speaking as a public official. You're speaking as someone who flunked American government 101. A pause. You're not lacking passion. You're lacking comprehension. You're not lacking microphones. You're lacking the ability to read a federal statute. And you're not lacking loyalty to power. You're lacking the fear that power demands. This country doesn't need another mouthpiece for the executive branch. It needs someone willing to recite the Constitution aloud, even when the president doesn't like the sound of it. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Thick, electric, devastating silence. Then a sharp clap. Another. Then all at once, the studio cracked open. Not stage, not polite, not TV applause, a rupture. The kind of ovation that comes not from agreement, but from recognition that something had just been spoken that should have been said long ago and needed to be said now. A few people in the front row pressed tissues to their eyes. One woman mouthed something toward the screen, something between "thank you" and "about damn time." A young man stood, hands trembling at his sides, not to protest, but because his constitution had just been read aloud like a lost gospel. Jasmine Crockett remained seated, head forward, back straight, like someone who came into the studio with no armor, because truth was the only weapon she needed. Olivelli took a breath, quiet, controlled. He didn't look left, he didn't look right. He looked at the audience both in the room and across America. Then, with the calm of someone who knew history had just been made, he said, "This wasn't a debate. This was a reminder. That power, no matter how loud, still answers to law." Fade to black.